What if the next barrel of oil never makes it out of the Gulf? What if the ship carrying it is already burning in the water while world leaders argue over sanctions? Something happened in the Strait of Hormuz tonight, and it did not happen by accident. Before we go further, if you want to stay ahead of every twist in this story, hit that subscribe button right now, tap the bell, and drop a like so more people see this. This channel exists because of viewers like you, and every share helps this reach someone who needs to understand what's really happening in the Middle East tonight. A tanker was struck in one of the most sensitive waterways on the planet. No warning shots, no public statement beforehand, just a crippled ship drifting near the coast of Oman, its engine room torn apart. This came only hours after Washington unveiled what officials are calling one of the toughest sanctions packages Iran has faced in years. And if you know anything about how Tehran operates, you already know this wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. Let's rewind and understand how we got here, because this story didn't start today. It started with a decision inside the White House to change strategy completely. For months, tension between the United States and Iran had been building slowly, almost quietly. Diplomatic channels were strained. Talks about Iran's nuclear program kept stalling. Behind closed doors, officials in Washington were losing patience. They had tried warnings. They had tried limited sanctions. None of it seemed to slow Iran down in any meaningful way. So this time, the administration decided to go bigger, much bigger. On August 25th, President Trump and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stood in front of cameras and unveiled a sweeping new sanctions package aimed directly at Iran's economy. This wasn't framed as another routine move. Officials described it as an all-out economic offensive, a campaign built to choke off every remaining financial lifeline Iran has left. Bessent didn't soften his language either. He made it clear that any nation, any company, any bank that continued doing business with Tehran would face serious consequences from the United States. There would be no gray area this time, no quiet workarounds, no pretending not to notice. This is important because it wasn't just a warning to Iran. It was a warning to everyone still trading with Iran in the shadows. And one country in particular found itself standing directly in the blast radius of that warning: China. For years, China has been Iran's economic lifeline. While much of the world pulled back from Iranian oil, Beijing kept buying, kept trading, kept the money moving. It's one of the biggest reasons Iran's economy hasn't fully collapsed despite years of sanctions. So when this new wave of restrictions specifically targeted anyone assisting Iran, China wasn't just watching from the sidelines anymore. It was suddenly part of the story. China's response came fast. Officials in Beijing stated that their trade relationship with Iran follows international law and should not be interfered with. They added that they would take whatever steps necessary to protect their own economic interests. On the surface, that might sound like standard diplomatic language, but read between the lines, and it's really a warning shot of its own. Beijing is telling Washington, we're not backing down either. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Buried inside Bessent's announcement was something that felt less like economic policy and more like a message meant for a very specific audience: the soldiers and officers inside Iran's own military. He spoke almost directly to them, asking them to think carefully about who they were really protecting by staying loyal to a government that keeps pushing its own people toward hardship. He pointed to history, to moments in other countries when soldiers chose not to fire on their own citizens, and how those choices ended up reshaping entire nations. It was a subtle but powerful attempt to plant doubt inside the regime's own foundation, not from the outside, but from within. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just about oil exports or banking restrictions. This was psychological. The administration wasn't only trying to break Iran's economy, it was trying to break the loyalty holding the regime together from the inside. For the Trump administration, this represented a real shift in approach. Instead of jumping straight to military escalation, the strategy leaned heavily on economic pressure first. Choke the money, choke the resources. Let the walls close in slowly instead of all at once. On paper, it sounds almost patient. But anyone who has followed Iran's history knows patience rarely stays one-sided for long. Iran does not simply absorb pressure and stay quiet. It never has. And this time would be no different. Behind the scenes, before any public retaliation even happened, signs of tension were already building. Military assets across the region were quietly repositioning. Communication channels between key players went unusually silent, the kind of silence that often means something is about to happen. Analysts who track this region for a living understood immediately that this wasn't just paperwork and financial penalties. This was the opening move of something much bigger. And the world didn't have to wait long to find out what that something was. The response came almost immediately. According to maritime monitoring authorities, a tanker was struck late in the evening, just a short distance off the coast of Oman. The engine room took the direct hit. The vessel was left disabled, floating helplessly in one of the most heavily trafficked and strategically important waterways on Earth. Thankfully, the crew survived. But the message behind the strike was impossible to miss. This happened right after the sanctions were announced. It wasn't random. It was Iran answering back, using the one tool it has used again and again for years: control over the Strait of Hormuz. If you're new to this region, here's why that strait matters so much. Every single day, dozens of vessels attempt to pass through those narrow waters, many without seeking any kind of authorization from Iran. And Iran has made it painfully clear, over and over, that it considers those waters its own to control. Ships get targeted, some get disabled, a few have even been seized entirely. This has become almost a grim pattern, a reminder to the rest of the world that Iran holds real leverage in one of the most critical choke points for global oil supply. A massive percentage of the world's oil moves through these waters every single day. So when a tanker gets crippled here, it's not just a regional headline. It sends a ripple straight through global markets almost instantly. Oil prices react. Shipping insurance costs climb. Countries that depend on this route for their energy supply start watching nervously, wondering if this is the beginning of something much bigger or just another isolated incident in a long, tense history. And that's exactly why the timing of this attack mattered so much. This wasn't only a military action. It was an economic statement fired right back at Washington. The United States wanted to hit Iran's economy where it hurts. Iran responded by threatening the very oil corridor much of the world depends on to keep functioning. It's almost like watching two sides play the same game from opposite ends, each one trying to squeeze the other's most valuable resource. There used to be an understanding between the United States and Iran about how to manage tensions in the strait, a kind of informal framework meant to prevent situations exactly like this one from spiraling out of control. That framework is essentially gone now, and without it, there's very little standing between one provocation and the next. Every new sanction seems to invite a new act of retaliation. Every retaliation invites an even stronger response. It's a cycle that keeps tightening turn after turn with no clear off-ramp in sight. For shipping companies, this uncertainty is becoming a real and growing problem. Every voyage through the strait now carries added risk. Insurance premiums are expected to climb sharply. Delays are becoming more common, and nations that rely heavily on oil moving through this corridor are watching closely, fully aware that a larger disruption here could hit their own economies hard and fast. Iran, through this one strike, sent a clear signal to the entire world. It will not simply stand by and accept new sanctions in silence. It still holds a powerful card, and it is more than willing to play it. But here's the thing. That tanker attack was only one piece of a much bigger picture unfolding that same day. While the ship sat disabled and drifting in the water, something else was happening high above Iraq, and it would push this entire situation into even more dangerous territory. If this story is pulling you in, make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next in the skies over Baghdad changes everything about how serious this confrontation has become. Take a second, hit that notification bell, and share this with someone who needs to understand what's really unfolding in the Middle East right now. Fighter jets were scrambling over Baghdad. In the early morning hours, reports confirmed the activity, though the exact target remains unclear. Analysts believe the jets were likely searching for Iranian-backed militia positions or drone activity somewhere in the region. This wasn't some random training exercise. It happened at a moment when tension across the entire region had already reached a boiling point. Every flight path was being tracked. Every movement in the sky was being watched by intelligence officers on multiple sides, each one trying to figure out what the other was planning next. But the most striking move of the day came from Washington itself. The United States announced bounties on 5 senior commanders inside Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, each one worth up to $10 million. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a direct attempt to destabilize the regime from the inside, targeting the very people who run its military machine. The list reads like a roadmap of Iran's entire command structure. The overall head of the organization, the officer controlling Central Command headquarters, the leader of the aerospace force, the branch responsible for Iran's ballistic missile program, the commander overseeing electronic warfare, believed to be behind cyber operations targeting American interests, and finally, the head of intelligence for the entire organization. 5 of the most powerful men inside Iran's military, suddenly with a price on each of their heads. Officials framed this as more than just a hunt for information. They described it as an attempt to finally hold these men accountable, not only for actions taken against the United States and its allies, but for years of how they've treated their own citizens. The underlying message was simple and brutal in its clarity. These men are no longer untouchable. Somewhere, someone close to them might know exactly where they are, and now there's an enormous financial incentive to come forward. This kind of tactic isn't new in modern conflict. Bounties on high-value targets have been used before, but the timing here mattered enormously. This came right after sanctions started squeezing Iran's economy, It came right after Iran had already struck back in the Strait. Layer by layer, pressure was building from every possible direction at once. Military posture in the skies, financial punishment through sanctions, and now a direct challenge aimed straight at the loyalty holding Iran's leadership together. Analysts who study these situations closely point out something important here. When massive sums of money are dangled in front of people close to power, trust inside that circle starts to erode fast. Commanders start wondering who around them might be tempted. Loyalty starts feeling less certain. This kind of psychological pressure can be just as damaging as any airstrike, maybe more so because it works quietly from the inside, chipping away at the very foundation a regime depends on to survive. Meanwhile, the visible show of force kept growing. Reports emerged of military exercises taking place across the region, alongside continued fighter jet activity in the skies. Officials confirmed that more than 70 commercial vessels had already been redirected away from the blockade zone entirely, avoiding the risk altogether. Think about the scale of that disruption. 70 ships changing course because of the danger building in these waters. That alone tells you how seriously the shipping world is taking this threat. Every piece of this puzzle points toward the same conclusion. The United States is applying pressure from every angle it possibly can, economically, militarily, and now personally, aiming directly at the men steering Iran's actions from behind the scenes. And that leaves one enormous question hanging over everything. How does a regime under this much pressure from this many directions decide to respond next? And more importantly, how much longer can it actually hold everything together? Because while all of this plays out on the world stage, something else is happening far away from the jets and the sanctions and the bounty announcements. It's happening quietly in the streets of Iran itself, and it might end up mattering more than anything we've talked about so far. Inside Iran, away from the battlefield and far from the political statements dominating headlines, ordinary life is starting to crack. Reports have emerged of fuel shortages spreading across major cities, including Tehran, Mashhad, and Kerman. Long lines have started forming outside gas stations, and people are growing frustrated, tired, and increasingly desperate. Here's why that detail matters, so much more than it might seem at first glance. Iran sits on top of one of the largest oil reserves anywhere in the world. This is a nation built on oil, a country that should never have to worry about fuel access for its own citizens. And yet, here we are, watching ordinary Iranian families wait in long lines just to fill their tanks. That contradiction tells its own powerful story. It suggests that even in these early days, the new sanctions are already disrupting systems inside the country in ways that are becoming impossible to hide. Analysts are cautious about calling this a turning point just yet. It's too early to know for certain. But it's being watched extremely closely because history has shown us something important about Iran. When basic resources become hard to access, when everyday life becomes a daily struggle, public frustration doesn't stay quiet for long. Economic strain inside Iran has led to unrest before, real unrest, the kind that spreads through cities faster than any government can control. And if that frustration reaches a boiling point again, the consequences could reshape everything happening in this region. At the same time, all eyes remain fixed on Beijing. China's position adds an entirely new layer to this already tense standoff. As Iran's most important economic partner, China continues buying Iranian oil despite years of existing restrictions. With this newest wave of sanctions, specifically targeting anyone assisting Tehran, China now finds itself directly exposed to potential consequences it hasn't faced before. China's response, as we mentioned earlier, was firm and immediate. Officials stated, their trade relationship with Iran operates within the bounds of international law and shouldn't be disrupted by outside pressure. They made it clear they intend to protect their own interests, whatever that ends up requiring. This signals something important. China is not planning to quietly step back from this relationship. And that raises a serious possibility. If Washington decides to move forward with direct sanctions against Chinese companies or institutions involved in this trade, the consequences could ripple far beyond the Middle East entirely, touching global markets, international trade routes, and energy prices everywhere. Around the same time, President Trump addressed the unfolding situation publicly, expressing confidence that Iran was, in his words, buckling under the weight of this pressure. His comments came around the same moment the sanctions news broke, reinforcing the administration's belief that this economic strategy was already showing results. Whether that assessment turns out to be accurate remains to be seen. Time will tell whether confidence translates into actual results on the ground. But it clearly reflects the mindset driving this entire new phase of pressure against Tehran. As all of this unfolds simultaneously, the region finds itself standing at an incredibly fragile point. Sanctions are tightening by the day. Bounties now hang over the heads of senior commanders. Fighter jets remain active in contested skies. A tanker sits disabled in the strait, a physical reminder of how quickly things can escalate. And now cracks are beginning to show inside Iran's own borders, visible in something as simple and human as a line of cars waiting for fuel. Every side involved here is making calculated moves, and every single action seems to invite another reaction in return. The United States is betting heavily that economic collapse can force real change without requiring a full military escalation. It's a strategy built on patience, pressure, and time. Iran, meanwhile, continues proving again and again that it will not simply absorb this pressure without pushing back in some form. And China's position adds yet another layer of complexity to a standoff that already had more moving pieces than most people realize. If you've made it this far, you already understand this isn't just another headline. This is one of the most dangerous chess matches happening on the world stage right now, and every move matters. If you want to see exactly how this unfolds, don't scroll away without hitting subscribe. Leave a comment telling me what you think happens next, because your voice actually shapes where this channel goes from here. So where does this actually leave us? Let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture, because it's easy to get lost in the individual headlines, the tanker, the bounties, the jets, the fuel lines, and lose sight of what they add up to together. What we're witnessing is a full-spectrum pressure campaign, something far more layered and calculated than a simple round of sanctions. Washington isn't just trying to hurt Iran's economy. It's trying to break the regime's ability to function on every level at once, financially, militarily, and psychologically. That's exactly why the bounties on IRGC commanders matter so much. It's not only about capturing 5 men, it's about planting seeds of doubt inside a system that depends entirely on loyalty and fear to hold itself together. And that's exactly why Iran's response in the Strait matters just as much. It wasn't a random act of aggression. It was Iran reminding the entire world that even while cornered, it still holds real leverage that runs straight through one of the most important oil corridors on the planet. When you disable one tanker, you don't just damage one ship. You send a message to every insurer, every shipping company, and every government watching from the sidelines. And you're telling them this route is not guaranteed to be safe anymore. Now bring China into this picture. For years, sanctions on Iran have existed alongside a quiet understanding that certain trade relationships would continue regardless of official restrictions. This new wave of sanctions threatens to break that unspoken arrangement completely. If Washington truly intends to pursue anyone assisting Iran, including major economic partners like China, this stops being a two-country conflict. It becomes something with the potential to reshape global trade relationships far beyond the Middle East. And then there's the human side of this story. The side that often gets buried underneath political statements and military maneuvers. Ordinary Iranian citizens standing in long lines just to fill their fuel tanks. Families in an oil-rich nation struggling with basic access to resources that should never be scarce. This is where the real pressure of these sanctions becomes visible, not in press conferences, but in daily life. And history has shown us, time and time again, that this is often where the most significant shifts eventually begin. So the real question isn't just how Iran will respond militarily in the coming days. The real question is how much internal pressure the regime can absorb before something inside gives way. Can leadership hold everything together while facing economic collapse, military threats, bounties on its own commanders, and growing frustration among its own people, all happening at exactly the same time? No one, not analysts, not officials, not anyone watching this unfold, can say for certain how this ends. What we do know is this. Every sanction brings a reaction. Every reaction brings a stronger response. And this cycle, spinning faster with every passing day, shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon. The strait remains tense, filled with ships now taking longer, more cautious routes, just to avoid becoming the next headline. The skies over Baghdad remain active, watched closely by more than one nation at once. And inside Iran, the lines at gas stations keep growing a little longer each day, a quiet but powerful signal that something beneath the surface is shifting. This is what makes this moment so different from earlier rounds of tension between these two nations. This isn't just about sanctions on paper anymore. It isn't just about political statements exchanged between capitals. This is a live, moving situation, where every single piece, economic, military, and human, is connected to every other piece. Pull on one thread, and the entire picture shifts. We are watching a regime that has survived decades of pressure, now facing something different. Pressure coming from multiple directions, simultaneously, hitting its economy, its military leadership, and its own people all at once. Whether Iran manages to weather this storm the way it has weathered so many before, or whether this becomes the moment everything finally starts to unravel, is something only time will reveal. What we can say with certainty is this: the world is watching closely, and for good reason, what happens in these narrow waters, in these contested skies, and on these city streets doesn't just affect one region. It touches oil prices at gas stations thousands of miles away. It touches global trade routes that keep entire economies running. and it touches the fragile balance of power that has defined this part of the world for decades. This story is far from finished. If anything, it feels like we're only standing at the very beginning of something much bigger, something that could reshape the Middle East in ways we haven't fully grasped yet. And when the next move comes, whether it's from Washington, from Tehran, or from Beijing, you can be certain of one thing: it won't come quietly. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, that's exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this story, because based on everything we've just walked through, the next chapter is coming faster than anyone expects. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of this shocked you the most. Share this video with someone who needs to see the full picture, not just the headlines. We'll be right here, watching every move, breaking it down the moment it happens. Stay close, because this is far from over.